webinar is the second segment of a longer webinar entitled McKinney-Vento Orientation for New Liaisons. The full webinar can be accessed on our website. My name is Ella DeVerse, and I am the Program Specialist for McKinney-Vento, the Education of Homeless Children and Youth at OSPI. I have been in this position for 2 years, and prior to OSPI, I spent 2 years as the McKinney-Vento Liaison for the Aberdeen School District. At OSPI, I help to provide technical assistance and training to the liaisons and school districts in Washington State. Having been a liaison and working with them often, I have found that there are 3 common questions that come from new liaisons. What do I need to do? How do I need to do it? And when do I need to do it? Today, we are going to focus on the second question. How do I need to do it? Since identification is one of the paramount duties of the liaison, it is important to understand the definition of homelessness under McKinney-Vento. The McKinney-Vento Act defines a homeless child or youth as a child or youth who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. This is a broad definition which is meant to encompass the many ways a child and youth can experience homelessness. When considering fixed, regular, and adequate, consider the following. If a situation is fixed, it is securely placed or fastened, not subject to change. If a situation is fixed, it is securely placed. A fixed residence is one that is stationary, permanent, and not subject to change. A regular residence is one which is used on a regular nightly basis. Can a child, youth, or family return every night? An adequate situation is sufficient for a specific requirement, lawfully and reasonably sufficient. An adequate residence is one that is sufficient for meeting both the physical and psychological needs typically met in a home. Does the housing have running water and electricity? Is it overcrowded? Or are there health hazards such as mold? The McKinney-Vento Act further breaks these categories down into specific situations that could lead to eligibility for services. Sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason. This is commonly known as doubling up and often occurs when families, children, and youth move in with friends or relatives. These situations are common and can occur for many reasons, so it is important to note that loss of housing and economic hardship are not the only factors to consider. Similar reason can encompass things such as family turmoil, the inability to care for a child or youth, or fleeing from domestic violence, and so on. A vast majority of eligible children and youth live in doubled-up situations. Living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or campgrounds due to a lack of alternative adequate accommodations. The important phrase here is lack of alternative accommodations. Do they have anywhere else to go? Is there another feasible and affordable housing situation available to them? I would also like to point out the mention of trailer parks. Not everyone that lives in a trailer park will be eligible, and these situations would be a family living in a travel trailer or RV that is not meant as a permanent housing situation. Oftentimes, students in motels and hotels will be eligible for services. They are not meant for permanent habitation and offer little privacy for families. Additionally, they can be expensive, and it may be hard for families to find other housing once they've moved into a hotel due to lack of finances. We also look at children and youth living in emergency or transitional shelters. This category also includes transitional housing programs. If a family is living in a transitional program that requires case management, provides income-based rent, and provides transition into a permanent situation, they may be eligible. As a side note, Section 8 is not an eligible living situation under McKinney-Vento. Living in a public or private place not designated for or regularly used as accommodations, and living in cars, parks, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings. Substandard housing would fall under a lack of adequate housing as mentioned in the definition. For more information on determining eligibility, please read the NCHE issue brief that is accessible by clicking on the link below. Once you are aware of eligibility criteria, it is time to move the conversation to identification. Identification is often a collaborative experience, and while it is the liaison's job to ensure it's done, identification can come from many different areas. It is important for not only the liaison to understand how to identify, but for other district staff and community entities to understand as well. Here are a few tips to remember when identifying eligible students based on the definition. Eligibility is always on a case-by-case basis. Each child and youth situation should be determined based solely on their living situation, not that of others who are eligible or ineligible. Make no assumptions. Determinations of eligibility must be based on the information provided by the parent, guardian, child, or youth. Preconceived notions of a living situation need to be set aside. Is it fixed, is it regular, and is it adequate? They must have all three. If they are missing one of the three, they are eligible for services. A child or youth may have fixed and regular housing, but it may not be adequate. Where else would they stay? Do they have other options? Are they affordable? Is the housing available in the area at all? Do they have financial means to find other housing? How did they end up there? Did they experience an eviction? Did the owner sell their rental and they had to leave? Was there a loss of job or a severe illness? Utilizing these questions and tips can help in determining eligibility, but it is also important to remember that questioning should not be invasive. We get some common questions about identification and eligibility in the office. Is there an age range? No. The McKinney-Vento Act applies to all school-aged children. In Washington state, students have until the age of 21 to obtain their high school diploma. They have until 22 if they are a SPED student. If a student is eligible for the K-12 system, they are eligible for services. Is there a citizenship requirement? No. The Supreme Court case Pyler v. Doe of 1982 makes it unlawful for schools to deny access to undocumented immigrants or to ask about immigration status. Is there a time limit for homelessness? No. The McKinney-Vento Act does not stipulate a time limit. Children and youth can experience homelessness for many years and are eligible for services throughout the duration of homelessness. Discussing identification and eligibility is a great time to bring up a discussion of unaccompanied youth. The definition of an unaccompanied youth is a child or youth who is not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. There is no age limit for unaccompanied youth, and any student eligible for the K-12 system could be an unaccompanied youth. This means that even students who have reached the legal age of 18 can be considered unaccompanied. While many people think of unaccompanied youth as older students in middle or high schools, it is important to remember that younger children can be unaccompanied as well. Think about the children living with grandparents or aunts and uncles. Additionally, it is important to remember that a student can be unaccompanied, homeless, or unaccompanied and homeless. If they are eligible for services as an unaccompanied homeless child or youth, they must be identified as both. You will need to flag these students in your school information system as both homeless and unaccompanied to ensure they are identified correctly. If a student is not in the custody of a parent or legal court-appointed guardian, they are an unaccompanied youth, and most of the time, these students will also be considered homeless. Situations for unaccompanied youth can fall apart quickly, so it is incredibly important to identify them and provide services. Just because a student is living with a family member, that does not mean that they are not homeless. You will want to ask the same questions about their living situation as you would ask a parent, guardian, or student who is living with their parent. Things to listen for would be: the child or youth is with them while the parent is incarcerated, in treatment, unable to care for the child, or as long as they need to be. Situations like this would be considered kinship care, and most of these students would be eligible for services. Once a child or youth has been identified as experiencing homelessness, there are rights and services that are available to them. LEAs are required to review and revise policies to remove barriers to the enrollment and retention of homeless children and youth. Adopt local policies and practices to ensure that homeless children and youths are not stigmatized or segregated on the basis of their homelessness. They must designate a liaison for homeless children and youth, and according to the student's best interest, maintain enrollment in the school of origin. They must also enroll homeless students immediately, even if they lack school records. They must provide transportation to and from the school of origin, and collaborate with community organizations and agencies to provide referrals and identify students experiencing homelessness. So let's look a little deeper into a few of these provisions. School of origin. A school of origin is the school the student was attending when permanently housed or the school in which they were last enrolled, including a preschool. School of origin also includes a designated receiving school at the next grade level when the student completes the final grade in their school of origin. An example of a feeder school would be a student who is leaving the 5th grade, and all students who attend their school of origin feed into a specific middle school. Under the feeder school pattern, this student would have the right to feed into that school with the rest of their cohort. For further information about school of origin and preschool, I would highly recommend reading the Schoolhouse Connection brief on early childhood education, accessible below. So why is school of origin important? It provides stability to students who may be facing instability at home. It removes the need to change schools frequently due to moves and provides continuity of instruction. They will not need to make new friends, become familiar with a new building, or a new teacher. It has been shown that students who switch schools frequently score lower on standardized tests, an average of 20 points lower. Mobility also hurts non-mobile students. Average test scores for non-mobile students were significantly lower in high schools with high student mobility rates. And it may take several months to recover academically after changing schools. Generally, staying in the school of origin is considered to be in the student's best interest. Based on the child or youth's best interest, the LEA shall keep the student in the school of origin for the duration of their homelessness and until the end of the academic year if the student becomes permanently housed. Or they shall enroll the student in any public school that houses students living in the attendance area where the student is living or eligible to attend. Students have the right to utilize the choice or waiver process to attend a school that is neither their school of origin nor their neighborhood school. However, while they would be eligible for services under McKinney-Vento, they would not be enrolling under their McKinney-Vento rights, and if the district does not offer transportation to other waiver choice students, they would not be required to provide it to the eligible student. This is the case unless the student's housing situation changes again, where transportation becomes a barrier to their education. Another important provision of the McKinney-Vento Act is transportation. If the student's temporary residence is in the same LEA as their school of origin, the LEA must provide transportation if it is needed. In many cases, students in these situations will be able to utilize normal bus routes. But if they are outside the attendance zone for their school, the LEA may need to provide other means of transportation. If the student has moved out of their school of origin's LEA, the LEA of residence and the LEA of attendance must work together to determine how to divide responsibility and cost sharing. If they cannot agree, they must share the cost equally. This is an important opportunity for liaisons and LEAs to work together and collaborate. It is important to have open communication with other districts for transportation needs. If it is in the student's best interest to remain in their school of origin and transportation is a barrier to their attendance and participation, LEAs must provide students experiencing homelessness with transportation to and from their school of origin at a parent's or guardian's request or the liaison's request for an unaccompanied youth. If a student finds permanent housing during the academic year, the student has the right to remain enrolled in their school of origin and receive transportation for the duration of the year in which housing was secured. In addition to providing transportation to the school of origin, LEAs must provide students in homeless situations with transportation services comparable to those provided to other students. Types of transportation services may include yellow bus, school van, transit bus, taxi, mileage reimbursement, and gas vouchers. So how do you determine best interest? There are multiple factors that need to be considered, and most of all, these determinations must be student-centered. The liaison should always presume that keeping a student in their school of origin is in their best interest. This is the case unless it's contrary to the request of the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth. Other factors that should be considered are student-centered and include the impact of mobility on the student's academic achievement, their education, and their health and safety. Preschool children should also include a consideration of attachments to teachers and availability of services in their new area, as well as travel time. The non-regulatory guidance provides further information on this. Most importantly, the decision must provide priority to the request of the parent or guardian, or in the case of an unaccompanied youth, the youth's request. Best interest determinations cannot be made based solely on distance and time, and the cost of the commute is not a factor for consideration. There may be times when the LEA liaison and the parent, guardian, or youth do not agree on the best interest of the student. If a dispute arises over eligibility for services, school selection, transportation, or enrollment, the liaison will need to be familiar with and utilize the Washington State dispute resolution process. The parent or guardian or unaccompanied youth must be provided a written explanation of decisions made by the school, LEA, or SEA, and how to appeal them. The liaison shall ensure the homeless children and youth are immediately enrolled pending resolution of the dispute. It is imperative that the steps of the dispute process are followed explicitly. If you have questions about this process, please feel free to contact us. All LEAs should have a copy of the dispute process, but it can be found on our website if needed. So how do you provide these services? Who does the liaison need to work with? The short answer is everyone. Every staff member in the LEA works with these students in some way or another. You should coordinate with and train all of them: registrars, school secretaries, counselors, teachers, paraeducators, etc. This coordination does not stop at the LEA level, though. Collaboration and coordination with community agencies is a required duty for the liaison. You will need to know who to send your families and youth to. So how do you find out who does what and whom you should send where? You need to network with your community, attend meetings, provide trainings, and maintain those relationships. Your contacts at the liaison will become the contacts for the students and the families you work with. Liaisons in small communities may need to connect with organizations in surrounding towns or districts. Think about where your family would go for assistance and start there. Once you have made contact and are familiar with the services in your area, you will be able to make referrals. Liaisons are required to refer homeless families and youth for medical health, dental health, mental health, substance abuse, and other services. Make a provider's list that you can reference and hand out to your families and youth. Build relationships with a few providers in your area, and help them make the appointment. This can be especially important for unaccompanied youth who may be uncomfortable making an appointment on their own. The job of the liaison is not necessarily an easy one, but we have resources available for liaisons to assist in their work and maintain compliance with federal regulations. We have updated forms available on our website to help streamline the process of identification and connection of services. The housing questionnaire is arguably the most important document that we have in our resources. All LEAs must provide the housing questionnaire to all students at least once annually. Most districts do this at the beginning of the year in welcome back packets. Additionally, the housing questionnaire must be in all enrollment packets. The housing questionnaire is one of the main forms of identification for children and youth experiencing homelessness. This form is compliant for federal and state monitoring purposes, and LEAs can adopt this form directly from our website by adding their LEA's name and the liaison's contact information. It is important to point out that while this is a required form for districts to utilize and distribute, students and families are not required to complete it in order to receive services. It is a tool for identification, not an application. The intake form is generally the next step after initial identification. If a student is identified through referral from a district staff and not the housing questionnaire, you can immediately go to the intake form. They do not have to complete a new housing questionnaire at that time. The intake form is a tool that should be completed by the liaison during a conversation with the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied child or youth. This tool helps with the identification of needs and services. It is compliant for federal and state monitoring purposes, and LEAs can adopt this form directly from our website by adding their LEA's name. It is important to point out that while the LEA and liaison must have some form of intake process, students and families are not required to complete it in order to receive services. Once again, this is not an application. If a student is eligible for services, they are eligible regardless of the existence of a housing questionnaire or intake form. In addition, signatures on the intake and housing questionnaire are not required. This is just one of our transportation forms. We are currently in the process of completing and uploading more transportation templates for your use. This form can be used within the district and in conjunction with other districts as well. It is compliant for federal and state monitoring purposes, and LEAs can adopt this form directly from our website by adding their LEA's name. All districts are required to provide notice to parents, guardians, and the community of the local child find. This sample flyer is just one option for LEAs and can be adopted by adding their information to the bottom. If your LEA already has a child find, you will need to ensure that it contains the correct and specific language for children experiencing homelessness. The language can be found at the bottom of this form and states, if your family is living in a temporary situation, you may contact the district where you are currently staying for a screening. Since many families experiencing homelessness may not consider themselves as such, the mention of a temporary situation is more inclusive. This form is compliant for federal and state monitoring purposes. LEAs are required to post the rights of children and youth experiencing homelessness in all LEA buildings and in the community and areas frequented by those experiencing homelessness. They should be hung in front offices, counseling centers, hallways, locker rooms, and even bathrooms. In the community, places such as the post office, DSHS, laundromats, schools, gas station, and churches are great options for posting. Posters can be ordered from our website at no charge and are available in multiple languages. Parent brochures should be available in all LEA buildings in areas such as the office, counseling centers, etc. They should also be provided to all parents or guardians of children and youth experiencing homelessness. Brochures can be ordered from our website at no charge and are available in multiple languages including Spanish, English, and Marshallese. Now that you are more familiar with your role as a liaison, we would like to know who you are. So let's talk about updating liaison information on the OSPI website. We maintain a list of every liaison in the state of Washington on our website. If at any time a new liaison is added to your district or replaces a former one, you must update your district's information with OSPI. To do so, go to the OSPI Homeless Education website, go to the liaison page, and click the update button. You will also be asked to enter your training information. Please remember that this information is not updated immediately. We have to enter it manually, so it may take up to a week for the new information to show. This list is of importance as it is required that the LEA designate a liaison and report their information to OSPI. But we also use it to refer families to the correct liaison, and oftentimes families and students utilize it themselves. If this information is incorrect, it can create a barrier. Thank you all for taking the time to join this webinar. If you have a question or concern, please do not hesitate to contact us. We can be reached at 360-725-6505, and our technical assistance email is homelesshead@k12.wa.us. While you can email us personally, we request that questions be sent to the technical assistance email as they are answered in the order in which they are received, and you will generally receive a response faster. The final 2 slides of this presentation contain contact information for the State of Washington's homeless foster care education teams, as well as other state and national resources. I would like to thank you all again for your time and remind everyone that if you have questions, please do not be afraid to reach out. Thank you.